Good afternoon, fellow classmates, and welcome to my tech talk entitled Perfused Cadavers, History, Current Use, and Future. During this presentation, the objectives include identifying a bit of the historical premise of cadaveric training in general from a Western philosophical perspective, listing 3 uses of perfused cadavers currently in practice. I'll talk a little bit about what types of programs tend to use perfused cadavers and how they're used in context of actual medicine as well as in training. I'm going to focus on training for the purposes of this specific tech talk. I'm also going to identify 2 alternatives to using perfused cadavers in the context of simulation-based training. And then I want to wrap up with trying to describe the benefits and drawbacks to using perfused cadavers over other simulation models in training curriculum. In order to better understand the current conversation of the use of perfused cadavers, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the history of the use of cadaveric training, cadavers in medical training in general. The earliest known use of cadavers in training are attributed to a scientist named Herophilus out of Alexandria in the 3rd and 2nd century BC. It was pretty common thinking at the time that the bodies were sacrosanct even after death and were unable to be used for scientific study, but he is attributed with at least 600 dissections and or vivisections at the time, although the vivisections are actually hotly debated in the literature. Once he and his students died off, so did the practice of using cadavers for medical training throughout the Dark Ages. And then really almost 1500 years later did it come back into favor in the Renaissance. And even at that time, it was still quite legal and there was some danger in doing that. However, the scientists of the Renaissance really believed in that and helped bring it into more favorable practice. And since that time, it's been used with some waxing and waning, but pretty consistently since that time. So when we look at a cadaver as a medical model or simulation model, one of the best parts about it is that it's anatomically identical. However, the fact that there's no physiology actually happening in a cadaver, it makes it very difficult in its natural state to study physiology without manipulating it to some extent. And the other benefit or drawback to using a cadaver without any kind of perfusion or reanimation or whatever the term you want to use it is that before then the scientists pretty much had to guess the patterns of blood flow or circulatory issues that the body presents when it's in its live state. Because of these limitations, it was only a matter of time before medical scientists attempted to replicate circulatory behaviors in a cadaver. So that leads us right into the topic at hand. So perfused cadavers, originally, if you look in the literature, were first used as a means of preserving transplanted organs or organs suitable for transplantation until they could be transplanted. So a lot of the literature early on in the 70s and even 80s involved renal transplantation articles. The other uses soon followed, and so when you look through the literature, there's a predominance of the use of perfused cadavers in device testing to include, new products and testing old products against new products, technique testing, so how is, this new technique compared to previous techniques in a circulatory model. And then for the purposes of this, we're going to focus on the use of perfused cadavers in replication for training purposes. The first article that mentions the perfused cadaver model for the purposes of medical training could be found in 2007, and that study was really a brain perfusion model, and so that was used specifically with cadaveric heads. But then very shortly thereafter, the pulsatile flow cadaver model was manipulated to replicate central circulation models as well as then organ or system specific circulation models to meet the demands of the training. So looking through the literature again, there was a total of about 35 articles that used a version of a pulsatile flow cadaver model in a training situation. And these are just the predominant disciplines that have used a model similar to this that have been published either in the literature or in conference abstracts. So I'd just like to highlight what I would consider to be a seminal article in this field of study, and it's an article from Abood et al., and it's entitled Novel Simulation for Training Trauma Surgeons. And I've just shown you a couple of the figures that they included in the article. The top picture there shows, the various setup materials, supplies, that they used in replicating a hemorrhage model for training trauma surgeons specifically, and then just a picture of the pump mechanism itself. And what's interesting about this literature is that the pump mechanism really varies in terms of what they use to replicate the pulsatile flow. I've seen something as basic as an aquarium pump. There are a few that use embalming pumps, but in this article, as well as many others, they use the balloon pump that would be available, in the OR. So similar to other simulation models, there are alternatives in the perfused cadaver model that may better suit your training. Right now there's a synthetic cadaver model on the market called Syndaver, and it can be used for training and it can create a pulsatile flow. And one of its benefits is that as you kind of use parts of the cadaver, synthetic cadaver, those pieces can be replaced. However, they are a little bit of a challenge in as much as the tensile strength or the tissue integrity of the synthetic model aren't quite the same as actual human tissue. And then they do have some kind of maintenance requirements that make them maybe not the ideal model, but that is available, and there's less ethical issues involved with the use of that model. Then the virtual reality task trainers we use quite frequently, and they're getting pretty high tech and have haptic controls and that kind of thing. And those are really useful for minimally invasive type surgeries. But there was an article in this literature that demonstrates that or suggests that the trainees didn't really like the use of the virtual reality model when juxtaposed with a perfused organ pulsatile training model within a cadaver. And then finally, live tissue training. So, again, we've been using animals to study, anatomy and physiology for thousands of years, and we continue to do so. But of course, there are huge ethical implications with that. And so, again, opportunities out there, no one size fits all, magic model to be used, but several options available. So as I did a literature review, I thought I would just throw the results of that literature review up here for your review. So we searched 5 databases, came up with a total of 99 unique articles. And as you can see, there were quite a number involving renal transplantation. And then between device, technique, pilots, and anatomy, physiology, flow studies, we have another big chunk. And then about 34 were training articles. And then you can see the various breakdown of the subspecialties that wrote these articles. So to summarize, the truth is that cadavers are not new. We've been using them for a very long time in medical training and just the basic understanding of human bodies and how they work. The addition of this perfusion model adds higher physiologic fidelity, which up until that point was left behind in that simulation model. But there are other models that could replicate that and may in fact present less of an ethical dilemma. Some of them in fact present more of an ethical dilemma in the live tissue modeling. But it is important to consider what your actual objectives are of that training simulation, just like any other simulation-based training, to pick the most appropriate model to provide the training. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great night.